We are lost. Our society is plagued with loneliness and depression. There is too little of what we need and too much of what we don't. Worst of all, there is a crisis of purpose for those of us who have managed to look beyond the veil even just a little bit. There is a general sense of dread, an unexplainable sense of unease. None of us can really put our finger on it, but it is there. It is real. Something feels off, as if the world was about to face a major test, the outcome of which is very much uncertain. We feel uprooted in the weirdest way, as if we have somehow entered a different timeline, or even a different mode of being altogether. And so, it does feel like we're walking a tightrope, not knowing how far up we are. It feels almost like we're moving into a new type of weirdness none of us have ever seen. But in all of this, we are not hopeless, and there is good reason to be optimistic. The West and its values are still strong. The vast majority of what we do is good, and we can still win, individually, but also as a society. The thing is, we have to recognize how it all went wrong. We have to go a different way and recalibrate our approach to these aspects of life. And this video hasn't been exactly easy to write, as it suffers from animosity current culture holds against terms such as religion, belief, God, and the danger here is that anything related to it is seen as completely outdated. More so, being atheist is the MO of a lot of people these days and seen as the religion of the intelligent. However, I am limited by the terminology that exists surrounding this topic that is a part of the human condition. Out of all the mentioned problems, the loneliness epidemic and the meaninglessness of it all are by far the worst issues in my opinion. The question then becomes, what has caused this? What makes current society so different from any other time in history? Why does daily life feel so empty and hollow? It seems like our current ideas of how to live life have reached their endpoint. In the ancient world, purpose was found nearly everywhere. Living a purposeful life was not rare, it was the norm. There wasn't a search for meaning. Life was inherently meaningful. And while I don't mean to suggest life was easy or even romanticize the hardships in ancient times, there was still a difference in perception of these hardships. In today's culture, all trials and tribulations, like job loss, sickness, or financial issues, all of them are bereft of a deeper purpose. They are useless, unnecessary, and altogether random annoyances that serve only the purpose of standing in the way of happiness. When all struggles are just a result of a random dice roll, life is pure hell, because life for most people is made up in large part of these trials. And if life is just made up of arbitrary horrors there's no escape from, then what's the point? And since these struggles are just random, they're meaningless, and all that suffering is essentially for nothing. Suffering is only bad, though, if it isn't connected to anything of value. Those connections matter. Destroying your iPhone while jumping in the pool to save a drowning child means pain. The phone is destroyed. But there is a purpose behind it. This suffering is connected to the saving of a child's life and therefore meaningful, whereas random occurrences of suffering, such as financial struggles, loneliness, and such, are merely pain for its own sake. The key here is that a life that is the result of a cosmic dice roll must always feel painful. It cannot feel any different. And this is important. Randomness without meaning cannot feel any different. Unconnected events are always going to feel this way. That's why doom scrolling social media all day can leave us with a bad feeling afterwards, because there was no greater purpose behind it, except to escape the moment. And the bad feelings of these random events are made worse by the fact that the dice rolls are so different. We like to compare the dice roll of our own life to the randomness in the life of others who may live a far better life than we do. Again, we are reminded that life is nothing but an arbitrary coincidence. The first step in rectifying our current perception of this is to move away from the perception of the dice roll, because looking at existence as a dice roll with no purpose will always feel bad and painful. And so, if we take anything from this video, it has got to be this. What is keeping us from changing the perception of life? I'd argue that this goes back to the beginning of my disclaimer. We are in a fight against meaning and purpose. We feel the obsessive need to validate what we do before we do it. We cannot prove that life has inherent purpose and meaning and prefer to suffer. And in this video, I'm going to argue that none of us owe anything to anyone. Nobody asked our opinion in the first place. We were just put here without a manual and no explanation. We spawned here and are stuck trying to figure it out. It's up to us to be happy, and all of us can get there. And to illustrate how we can get there, let me compare the modern world to the ancient world. The ancient world was a tough place to be due to the constant presence of sickness, famine, war, oppression, horrible social norms, abhorrent treatment of women, very much imperfect court systems, and altogether a very short life. And I'm not going to go into ancient Greece here for too long, except just for a second, so we can get a feel for what life was like. And so imagine someone came to your job today and told you that you had to go to war, because that is what the life of the average farmer was like. In ancient Greece, you were both farmer and citizen soldier. And so imagine the kind of fear this would instill in you. You're a simple farmer with little to no military training, and you basically know where to stand within the phalanx. That's about it. And while war is always a nightmare, but imagine like those individual man versus man fights were beyond brutal. It's hard to imagine something more terrifying than some barbarian charging you with an axe. No modern medicine either, like no penicillin, no tetanus shot. And I can't imagine those fights being particularly clean. The point here is that life was tough, and yet, even in the toughest of circumstances, such as going to war, these farmers have felt a deep sense of belonging to society. War was seen not only as necessary, but defending the city-state was a source of identity and purpose. In other words, going to war wasn't seen as a random unfairness, but as the very thing that made you a citizen, and thus it had meaning and purpose connected to it. Even more important than the connection to society was religion, as polytheistic belief meant that every aspect of life in the natural world was a direct consequence of the involvement of the gods. From the sunrise in the morning to crops that yield food, life meant that there was a constant underlying communication and connection to divinity, making life itself divine and deeply meaningful. The omnipresence of this connection to the gods is key. As humans, we define ourselves by what we do. And when we say, "I'm a swimmer," we say that because it is the things we do repeatedly that become who we are. That means that practicing and connecting seemingly mundane tasks to the divine makes these tasks themselves meaningful. This means that giving our own lives meaning can only be achieved by taking action. In the case of the ancients, they achieved this constant presence of meaning through offerings, prayers, festivals, ceremonies for the gods. They saw their own lives as part of a godly world, giving them a satisfying feeling of purpose. Even simple, everyday acts were deeply meaningful. And what's more is that in their view, there was no randomness to life. We've talked about the dice roll. The ancients didn't perceive their lives in this way at all. For better or worse, everything good and bad that was happening to a person had their reasons, and there was always something that could be done to change one's fortune by pleasing the gods. Life wasn't seen as an unchangeable dice roll, but as an interaction with something higher up that could actually be influenced. This influence means an enormous amount of deeply felt agency that they could use to better themselves, take responsibility for their lives, and move forward with a deep sense of connection to their place in the world. Beyond the individual connection to the divine, big community events such as the Olympic Games were held to honor the gods as a collective. Festivals, processions, and musical performances were not done in a vacuum, but always to give thanks to the gods. All of this means a constant showing of gratitude, and many things can be said about what showing gratitude does to human, and I won't go into this. The main point of all of this is that no aspect of human life was its own standalone thing. And now let's compare that to what we do in the West. In the West, we have destroyed any sense of belonging to our own society, as the post-colonial world is only seen as a pile of ill-gotten gains made by an evil people for no other reason than greed. And since Nietzsche killed God, we have lost any sense of connection to the divine. We hate the world we live in and have convinced ourselves that there is no world above. The question then becomes, what's left? Religious fanaticism is off-putting and annoying. And just to make sure I'm not misunderstood here, this video does not advocate for any specific belief. That's not what this is about. The truth is this. Having a sense of purpose is an important part of the human condition. It is a need that arises the instant our needs for food and shelter are met. And for thousands of years, religion has been the main driver for this need. If you're not into religion, and trust me, I get that, you may scoff at this notion, but that doesn't make it any less true. Where does it come from? Take the famous red utopia. If you don't know red utopia, basically in the 1950s, researchers built what they thought were perfect living arrangements for rats. They gave the rats as much food as they wanted, shelter, and building material for their nests, and they also protected them from all predation. One might expect that since all the needs of the rats were met, they would have thrived. But as we all know, the opposite happened. There were increased rates of violence, the unaliving of their offspring, and unexpected sexual behaviors. Some rats became isolated and inactive, withdrawing from social interaction altogether, while others became hyper aggressive. Eventually, the rats stopped mating and eventually all died. Despite the fact that they had what we think are perfect conditions, with an infinite food supply, the entire rat population died out. The point here is that material wealth alone is not only worthless, if it exists in isolation, it is a net negative. And the rats weren't just lacking stimulation either. They could eat and mate as much as they wanted. But they lacked opportunity to gather the food before they ate it, to hide it from predators, learn how to manipulate their environment to their advantage, build a nest, etc. They simply lacked opportunity to be a rat. They were not able to do what they were made for, and as humans, we're much the same. We have certain abilities that need exercising, or else we deteriorate slowly and painfully as we devolve down to our lowest levels. Our unique capacity to observe ourselves demands an explanation. As far as we know, we are the only species in the universe that is conscious to that level that we are. We are the only species that can observe not only the outside world, but the voice in our head that we think of as our thoughts. A voice that very often cannot be controlled. We have no control over who we love, what food we like, or what music seems pleasant to us. But, out of nowhere, there's a voice in our head that we can watch. And the ability to watch a voice that narrates our own lives seemingly out of nowhere and for no good reason means many things. But most of all, it can be a great source of dread about the reasons of why we are here. And therein lies the problem. At the risk of sounding corny, but man feels alone among the stars. All of us are scared and confused because nobody has any idea of what's going on. We drink and party and do anything in our power to distract ourselves from that reality, but this nagging feeling all of us know, in some form or another, it is always present, no matter how dormant it may be. Imagine somebody took you, deleted all your memories, including your language, and teleported you into an alien world, because that is what happened to every single one of us. At birth, all of us were essentially teleported into this world, nearly blind, stupid, and full of fear for no apparent reason. And because postmodern society lacks any self-awareness, we have opted to elevate ourselves into godhood in an act of unbelievable foolishness, thinking that we are capable of satisfying this deep emotional need ourselves for feeling cared for in a world we cannot hope to understand. And the problem is, we can't. Nobody can. Nobody has the answers for life. We are a society riddled with depression, fear. We have a loneliness and a meaning crisis. But this all goes much further even still. The absence of meaning has effects we don't even fully see today. We are currently experiencing the downfall of all traditional institutions that make up society, such as marriage, church, and family. And their downfall is just a precursor to much broader problems, such as the deterioration of more loosely defined but very important institutions, like the relationship between men and women, how we relate to our friends and neighbors, and society as a whole. We talked about how, since the beginning of history, we have lived with a connection to some form of divinity, some source of higher purpose. With modernity and its luxuries like modern medicine and industrialization of the world, God has taken a step back until he was completely diminished by Nietzsche in an act of indescribable foolishness. There was a reason for why people lived with the divine for so long, and taking it away is the root cause for most of today's problems, such as hopelessness, depression, and the loneliness epidemic. We have turned the world into a race with no finish. At one point, we're going to have to realize that a sense of meaning is the foundational substructure for everything that has made Western civilization great and life worth living. And I don't mean to suggest that misunderstood religiosity has been the driving force for what has made us successful. When I say God, I don't mean bearded man in the sky. Let me explain. The way to order oneself within the world as a human has been a misunderstood concept since forever. Accepting one's position as a human does not mean going to church once a week. You can do that, sure, but that's not the point. Accepting that there's more to life means accepting that we cannot move forward in the world alone by ourselves. If we don't see anything bigger than ourselves, we will automatically elevate ourselves, and for a lot of people, that simply means prioritizing our most basic needs to excess. In such an environment, nothing that has a godly spark can develop. It turns us into instinct-driven goblins, addicted to social media, food, sex, partying, laying in bed, endlessly doom-scrolling, waking up tired in the morning, dragging ourselves out of bed or not, maybe going to work or not, and then spending the rest of the day simply seeking more dull and meaningless pleasure. And since in current society we live in abundance, there is not even the necessity to be productive and to give oneself any rules, since almost everything is provided for everyone. Everything is available to us at any time. We don't fear famine, wild animals, heat, cold, or hunger. All that means is that succumbing to our lowest instincts is very, very easy in our current decadent society, whereas in ancient times this might have been more difficult due to the actual need to work hard to avoid suffering. And so, every man has to believe in something bigger than himself. That's the point. That's the point of this video. This is what I essentially mean by God. A man that can see something bigger than himself can feel and observe a divine presence in everyday mundane tasks. It is empowering to see beauty and purpose in each passing moment and living up to a standard. This allows to escape the existential dread. It defeats depression, loneliness, and can make us productive and happy. To summarize, we have taken God out of the equation. Traditional institutions are on their way out, and now we are assuming God's position. This is the final step. Not only is man missing God, the abrupt and near instantaneous removal of all connection to the divine after thousands of years in service of it has suddenly put man in a position he was not meant to be in. The role for the divine is still there. It's just that we have assumed this role without even realizing it, much less thinking about it. And to explain, I'm going to borrow here from the story of the Israelites for a minute, which is of enormous historical significance because it is essentially the first blueprint of nation building. When the Israelites made their way through the desert, God provided them with manna. The desert here means a harsh life, and manna means the right kind of food. Essentially, God gave them what they needed, but not necessarily what they wanted. And so the Israelites weren't too happy with this arrangement. They desired more. And so they started smelting gold in an effort to build themselves a new god, building a lamb. In essence, they tried to create their own rules to govern their lowest instincts, disregarding what was good for them. This all was against the backdrop of God revealing his rules on Mount Sinai to Moses, and the experience with horrible Canaanite religions that had an easy time gaining followers, as they allowed for all kinds of horrible behavior. I'm not going to go into detail here too much, but they basically sanctified prostitution and allowed for child sacrifice, and generally any limitless depravity man could want. All of what this is a representation of the struggle of man to be maximally free, to follow his animal instincts, versus our human capacity to build and create. The Bible describes this conflict as essential to being human, and it has happened many times throughout history. The Canaanites were not alone in this struggle. The Greeks and Romans have all had their pleasure gods. And this is why monotheism became such a crucial part of nation building that is sustainable long term. Polytheism allows for choice, which meant you could pick a god like Dionysus and believe in endless orgies, sex, food, etc., essentially choosing your preferred pleasures and assigning a god to them in order to feel good about yourself. That's not how this works. Ascending the steps of Maslow's pyramid of needs requires a conscious effort, and absent a driving force, we will always go back to the lowest levels until we experience discomfort, which in today's world is nigh impossible. Thus, keeping us tied down, endlessly doom-scrolling, each dopamine hit keeping us from hitting the point of pain. That pain that is so crucial in finding the strength to do something other than escaping the moment. In essence, every man needs to believe in something. Living in accordance to a few basic divine rules can dramatically alter life and keep us not only from this deteriorating process, but lift us up. Current culture views all rules only as restrictive and repressive, sure. Nothing is set in stone, everything is up for debate, and the adherence to any standard is rejected outright. This, too, has given rise to this idea that all behavior is equal, nothing is inherently good or bad, and therefore everything is permissible. There is no judge, and within things that are legal, no one activity is better or worse than any other. And so, the freedom to do whatever seems right to us can quickly morph into doing whatever seems pleasant. Doing whatever is pleasant can quickly turn into excess. When anything is permissible, why not do it? Why not mindlessly stuff your face with fast food? Becoming sick is the consequence, but worse than the actual consequence is the meaninglessness of such instinct-driven behavior. That's why we doomscroll, overeat, or endlessly play video games. Whenever we do this, we're giving up part of our humanity. We don't aspire to aim for higher things in these moments. We are following our lowest instincts for gratification at any cost and devolve until we're nothing but a chemical reaction that runs its course with 100% predictability. And this is precisely what's been happening in the West. We are constantly hijacked by our lowest impulses. Doom-scrolling social media, watching porn, and overeating aren't just bad, they mean an automated life, a deterministic life, and when all humanity and meaning are fully removed and each action is just a reaction to the action that was taken before, we are essentially opting out of being a human. We have taken ourselves out of the equation and let our lowest impulses decide our fate, and this is what all of us can feel very deeply. The absence of purpose dulls the mind and can make us feel like the world we live in has no soul to it. It feels like an empty shell, and it has been like this for many years. The thing is this: being human happens whenever we tap into the aspects of us that make us distinct from animals and actively exercise our capabilities as humans. We shouldn't see the freely chosen submission under rules as only limiting and backwards. All rules open and close some doors in life, and thus can change the perception of life dramatically. The restrictions stand out, of course. If you're still here, you may be asking yourself how you can get to a place of meaning. The answer is this: following a set of divine rules will immediately fill you with a deep sense of purpose, unlike anything current culture can offer. And I may sound like a broken record here, but I'm not advocating for religious zealotry. What I am doing is trying to show a way forward that just may be a big step towards finally awaking to life that doesn't feel like, well, like it does for most people right now. There's an actual chance to feel more alive than ever before. However, this requires some rethinking and action. If we want to get rid of this mind-numbing feeling, the depression and the constant feeling that nothing matters and that there's no way forward that is so prevalent amongst Gen Z and millennials, then there needs to be a shift in thinking around life. A sense of purpose and meaning can be obtained, and it is not actually that hard to do. It simply requires to be open, and open the heart to an idea. The TLDR here is that we need to live a little bit more like the ancients did, and see the beauty and the divine in everything around us all the time. It is about making a choice to be more than a chemical reaction, to be empowered by the divine and accept that we are special. We are here for a purpose. We're not just here to suffer. We can, like the ancients, have some pride for our lives, for our personal hero's journey. Whatever anyone may say, if all is equally meaningless and equally worthless, why not choose an idea that makes life actually better? That doesn't necessarily mean going to the house of worship of your choice and praying. This is part of traditional religious practice, sure, but it is not everything. This makes it seem like religious practices are outside of everyday life, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Spirituality is much deeper than that. True practitioners of any spiritual endeavor don't see their belief as a set of rules to be observed merely outside of everyday life. The key is to invite meaning into the most mundane tasks of everyday life. It's not about Christmas once a year, it is about being in the constant presence of something bigger than ourselves. Here's an example. Take dietary rules. Many religions know dietary laws, and while they can seem arbitrary, reality is that observing these rules closely keeps the divine constantly present. And that is what this is all about. That is the key. Having a constant reminder of the larger question in life puts things into perspective. Done correctly, observance of a divine rule set is not limiting, but massively empowering and can serve as the antidote to the perceived meaninglessness and dullness of daily life. Maybe you're finding spirituality difficult, and that has certainly been the case for me in the past. And during this time, I was always looking out for a sign or something, but that wasn't it. The answer is you. You just decide that the world has meaning, and that's it. Once you decide this and once you act it out, this meaning will come to you. In the past, I've never been too fond of religion in the traditional sense either, trust me. I've been a staunch atheist for a long time, and I'm not going to tell you to become religious, go to church, and listen to sermons. I'm not telling you which religion to pick. Hell, I'm not even telling you to pick a religion. That's not what this video is about. It is up to each and every one of us to disregard postmodern hatred for the divine and simply start by acknowledging what every single civilization has known since the dawn of time, many of which have lasted many hundreds, if not thousands of years. Nothing any modern country can say. Maybe there's a reason for that. And look, some of the criticism towards religion and the way it has impacted society in the past is certainly fair. But we may have overreacted and just thrown the baby out with the bathwater. The total loss of all spirituality and belief, the loss of purpose and institutions that made for a good community one could rely on, has been devastating in my opinion. And reconsideration of our stance towards religion may be in order. And what that looks like to you, I cannot answer. But one thing is for certain. If we wish to live a fulfilling life, we will have to at least consider the possibility that there's more than we can see.